Echoes of the spirit world, do you dare to listen? Have you ever wondered if there's a world beyond our own? Do spirits, supernatural entities, and unexplained phenomena truly exist, or are they just figments of our imagination? Welcome to DTC, the place of the brave, where we don't just tell ghost stories, we explore the mysteries of the spirit world, where echoes from the unseen continue to whisper. Echoes of the Spirit World takes you on a journey through eerie legends, chilling encounters, and supernatural phenomena that defy explanation. Here, we don't fear the unknown, we seek to understand it. Step beyond the veil between worlds. Do you have the courage to face what lies beyond? Follow DTC, the place of the brave, and uncover the untold mysteries with us. In many cultures, dreams are fleeting illusions, mere reflections of thoughts, fears, and desires. But in certain traditions, they hold a far deeper meaning. They are messages, warnings, and glimpses into a reality unseen by most. Some dreams linger long after waking, carrying an eerie sense of familiarity, as if something or someone is trying to reach out from the beyond. Since childhood, I had strange dreams, but I never thought much of them. I dismissed the whispers, the shifting shadows, the fleeting images that dance behind my eyelids. I was a child, and nightmares were simply a part of being young. Even when I awoke in a cold sweat, feeling as if unseen eyes were watching me, I convinced myself it was nothing. But the night Chen was killed, something changed. It was 1998. The neighborhood I grew up in, a tight-knit Southeast Asian community, was under siege. Gang violence had escalated to a terrifying level. Drive-by shootings, turf wars, and revenge killings had become so frequent that the sound of gunfire no longer startled people the way it should have. Fear had settled into the cracks of our streets like an ever-present mist, unseen but suffocating. Chen lived next door. He was 17, just 5 years older than me, but to my 12-year-old self, he seemed like an adult. He was quiet, reserved, and never looked for trouble. He didn't wear the colors of any gang, didn't flash signs or boast of connections. He was just a boy who lived his life like any other. But that didn't matter in a world where violence often found the innocent. The night Chen died, I didn't hear the gunshots. It happened just outside his house, around 1 a.m. He had been out late and had just stepped out of his car when the bullets found him. He never even had the chance to run. The shooter had been waiting, hidden in the darkness, watching. One moment Chen was reaching for his front door, and the next he was bleeding out on the pavement. By morning, the neighborhood was already buzzing with whispers. A revenge killing, a mistake, a warning. No one knew for certain why Chen had been targeted, but his death set off a cycle of retaliation that would claim even more lives in the months to come. My parents didn't tell me what had happened. They didn't want me to be afraid. I found out only in fragments, hushed voices behind closed doors, the absence of Chen's presence, the way people spoke of him in the past tense. But even before I knew the full truth, I sensed something was wrong. That night, before I even knew of Chen's death, I had a dream. I was standing outside in the cold, the pavement slick with something dark and wet. I looked down, but I couldn't see my feet, only shadows shifting beneath me like restless spirits. The air was thick, suffocating. And then I saw him. Chen stood a few feet away, his face pale under the dim glow of the streetlights. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide, not with fear, but with urgency. He was trying to tell me something. I took a step toward him, but before I could reach him, he disappeared. I woke up with a gasp, my body drenched in sweat. My room was silent, but the air felt different, as if I wasn't alone. The sensation of being watched was overwhelming, pressing against my skin like an unseen weight. I didn't understand it then. I didn't know that some spirits seek out those who can see them, that those caught between worlds sometimes reach out to the living, desperate to be heard. It wasn't until years later when I became a shaman that I understood. Looking back, I realize now that Chen was trying to speak to me. His death had been sudden, violent, and unjust. He had not been ready to leave this world, and so, in the only way he knew how, he reached out. At 12, I was too young to comprehend the weight of what I had experienced. I didn't yet know that I had a connection to the spiritual realm. I didn't know that the dreams I had were not just dreams, that they were omens, whispers from those who had passed. But my journey had already begun. For years after Chen's death, I tried to push aside the strange experiences, the shadows that moved on their own, the dreams that felt too real, the whispers in the night that no one else could hear. I told myself they were figments of my imagination, tricks of the mind, but the spirits don't let you ignore them forever. When I finally accepted my path as a shaman, I came to understand that there is a reason why certain people are chosen to see beyond the veil. Some of us are meant to listen, to guide, to serve as a bridge between the living and the dead. Chen was one of the first spirits to reach out to me, but he would not be the last. I still think about Chen sometimes, about the life he should have had, about how easily it was stolen from him. I wonder if his spirit ever found peace, or if he still lingers, searching for something or someone to hear his story. The dead do not always move on so easily. Some leave behind unfinished business. Some carry messages that must be delivered. Some simply do not want to be forgotten. And for those of us who can hear them, the choice is never truly ours. We can ignore them, pretend they do not exist. But sooner or later, they find us. And when they do, we have no choice but to listen. Some memories never fade. They linger at the edges of our minds like shadows in the periphery, never fully gone. Some nights, when the air is thick with silence, I still think about him, about that night, about the impossible encounter that should never have happened. I was 12 years old, too young to understand what I had seen, too young to know that the dead don't always stay where they belong. But after Chen died, I began to understand that not everything in this world follows the rules of the living. It was late, probably around 11 at night. I was sitting at my desk, hunched over my homework, my pencil scratching against the paper. The house was quiet. My parents had gone to bed, my siblings were already asleep, and the only sound was the occasional rustling of trees outside my window. Then I heard it. A knock, soft but deliberate, just enough to break the silence and send a chill creeping up my spine. I froze, my hand hovering above my notebook. My window was high, too high for anyone outside to reach without a ladder. For a brief moment I thought maybe it was my father, standing in the backyard, trying to get my attention. But when I turned my head and looked toward the glass, my breath caught in my throat. Chen. He was standing outside, his face partially illuminated by the dim glow of the street lamp. His expression was calm, almost amused, as if nothing was wrong, as if he wasn't supposed to be dead. "Hey," he said, his voice slightly muffled by the glass. "Come outside and smoke with me." His words caught me off guard. I had never seen him smoke before, and even if he did, he knew I didn't. It was an odd thing to say, out of place, unnatural. I hesitated. I can't, I finally replied. "If my parents find out, I'll get in trouble." Chen smiled, but something about that smile was off. It was too still, too cold. Not like the quiet, genuine expressions I had seen on him before. "Oh, come on," he coaxed. "Just for a little while." Something inside me twisted. The air in the room felt heavier, pressing down on my chest. My instincts screamed at me to shut the blinds, to turn away, to pretend I hadn't seen him. "I really can't," I said again, forcing a laugh to mask the nervousness creeping into my voice. "Maybe another time." Chen tilted his head slightly, as if considering my words, and then, in the blink of an eye, he was gone. Just gone. 1 second he was standing there, his breath fogging up the window pane, and the next there was nothing but the empty darkness outside. No sound of footsteps, no rustling of leaves, just silence. A deep, suffocating silence. I stared out the window, my heart hammering in my chest. My mind scrambled for an explanation, but none made sense. I wanted to believe I had imagined it, that maybe I was tired, that maybe my mind had played a cruel trick on me. But something in my gut told me that wasn't true. And 2 days later, I learned the truth. I didn't know that Chen had died until my parents told me we were attending a funeral. At first, I didn't believe it. I wanted to argue, to tell them that there had to be a mistake, that I had just seen him, that he had stood outside my window, smiling, talking to me. But as I followed my parents into the funeral home, the weight of reality crashed down on me. There he was, lying in the casket, pale, still, dead. I felt my stomach drop, my legs wobbled, my breath came in shallow gasps. It was impossible. It didn't make sense. But there was no denying what I was seeing. Chen had been dead long before the night he knocked on my window, and yet I had spoken to him. It took me years to understand what happened that night. When I became a shaman, I learned that the dead don't always leave quietly. Some linger, lost between worlds, searching for something or someone who can hear them. Some are unaware they have passed, trapped in a loop of their last moments, their last thoughts. And some call out to the living, hoping for a response. I don't know why Chen came to me. Maybe he hadn't realized he was gone yet. Maybe he had unfinished business. Or maybe, just maybe, he had been trying to lure me outside, to take me somewhere I was never meant to go. The dead do not always appear as they were in life. Sometimes they wear the same faces, speak in the same voices, carry the same memories, but they are no longer the same. Something else lingers in their place, and sometimes it calls your name. I never saw Chen again after that night, but the memory of him, of that impossible encounter, never left me. It was my first real brush with the world beyond, the first undeniable proof that I could see things that others couldn't. It was also my first warning. Not all spirits seek help. Some simply want to be acknowledged. But others are something else entirely. And in that moment when Chen stood outside my window with that eerie, unnatural smile, I realized something I would never forget. When I became a shaman, I learned that the dead don't always leave quietly. Some linger, lost between worlds, searching for something or someone who can hear them. Some are unaware they have passed, trapped in a loop of their last moments, their last thoughts. And some call out to the living, hoping for a response. I don't know why Chen came to me. Maybe he hadn't realized he was gone yet. Maybe he had unfinished business. Or maybe, just maybe, he had been trying to lure me outside, to take me somewhere I was never meant to go. The dead do not always appear as they were in life. Sometimes they wear the same faces, speak in the same voices, carry the same memories, but they are no longer the same. Something else lingers in their place, and sometimes it calls your name. I never saw Chen again after that night, but the memory of him, of that impossible encounter, never left me. It was my first real brush with the world beyond, the first undeniable proof that I could see things that others couldn't. It was also my first warning. Not all spirits seek help. Some simply want to be acknowledged, but others are something else entirely. And in that moment when Chen stood outside my window with that eerie, unnatural smile, I realized something I would never forget. When the dead come knocking, you should never open the door. After Chen's death and the growing violence in our neighborhood, my parents decided it was time for a fresh start. They packed up everything and moved us out to the countryside, far away from the gang wars, the gunshots, and the ever-present fear that had become a part of daily life. The new house was different, quieter, isolated, surrounded by nothing but open fields and trees that whispered in the wind. It should have been peaceful. It should have been safe. But from the moment we arrived, something felt off. I couldn't explain it at first. It wasn't fear exactly, more like an unsettling loneliness, as if the house wasn't entirely empty, as if something unseen lingered in the corners, watching. and soon the signs began. It was late at night, and I was sitting in my room, immersed in a video game, the glow of the screen casting flickering shadows across the walls. The rest of the house was silent. My parents were asleep, and my younger sisters, Cherry and Lisa, had already gone to bed. Or so I thought. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A small figure darted past my open door. It was Cherry, unmistakably her. But something was wrong. There was something white wrapped around her neck. A scarf? A towel? I couldn't quite tell, but before I could process what I had seen, she ran past again, this time in the opposite direction. The same white cloth still draped over her shoulders, fluttering as she moved. A chill crawled up my spine. Something felt unnatural. I stood up and walked to my sister's shared bedroom, pushing the door open just enough to peek inside. Both of them were there, fast asleep. I swallowed hard. My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I had just been tired and my eyes had played tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. A few nights later, something else happened. I had just finished brushing my teeth and was about to leave the bathroom when I noticed something strange. A long strip of toilet paper stretching from the doorway into the hall. It wasn't torn or crumpled, but laid out neatly, as if someone had deliberately placed it there. Frowning, I bent down and picked it up. It was soft, ordinary. Nothing about it seemed out of place. But then I flicked the light switch. The second the room went dark, I felt it, a presence. Something was standing behind me. I spun around, slamming the light back on, my breath catching in my throat. The bathroom was empty, but the air felt wrong, heavy, thick with something unseen. I stood frozen, listening to the silence, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, just as I was about to step out, I heard it, soft, almost playful. A giggle, a woman's laughter echoing faintly down the hallway. That night I struggled to sleep. The laughter had faded, but its presence still lingered in my mind, looping over and over. It hadn't been my mother, it hadn't been my sisters, and it certainly hadn't been my imagination. At some point, exhaustion won, and I drifted off. But it didn't last long. Something woke me in the middle of the night. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe in the stillness. And then faintly, I heard it again. The laughter. It was distant, but unmistakable. A woman's voice, soft and melodic, yet dripping with something unnatural. It came from the hallway. I turned onto my side, my body stiff with unease. The bedroom door was slightly open, just enough for me to see the sliver of darkness beyond. The laughter grew louder, as if whatever it was had noticed me listening. Then a shadow moved past the gap. I stopped breathing. Something was out there. I wanted to shut my eyes, to pull the blanket over my head, to pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I couldn't look away. My pulse pounded in my ears, drowning out everything else. The shadow passed again, slowly this time, lingering just beyond the doorway. And then the doorknob rattled. I bolted upright, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, to hide, to do something, but I couldn't move. The rattling stopped. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, ever so gently, the door creaked open another inch. The darkness beyond seemed deeper than before, like an open mouth waiting to swallow me whole. And then, from just outside the door, the woman whispered my name. By morning, the house felt normal again, if normal meant pretending that nothing had happened. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell my sisters. I convinced myself that I had imagined it, that the exhaustion had played tricks on me. But the unease never left. Over the next few weeks, the strange occurrences continued. Small things at first. Doors left slightly open, objects moving from where I had left them, the sensation of being watched when no one else was around. And sometimes at night, I still heard the laughter. Eventually, I learned to ignore it, or at least I tried to, but deep down, I knew the truth. We weren't alone in that house. We never had been. And whoever or whatever was there, it had been waiting long before we arrived. The laughter had followed me for weeks. Ever since we moved into that house, the strange occurrences had escalated. Whispers in the night, doors creaking open on their own, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. I had tried to ignore it, to convince myself that I was imagining things. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something else lived in that house. And then one night it came to me in a dream. I opened the door to my room, expecting to step into the familiar hallway of my home. But what greeted me instead was something entirely different. I was no longer in my house. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, long and narrow, its walls lined with flickering white candles. The air was thick with the scent of melting wax, and the flames cast long, trembling shadows against the walls. It was eerily silent, the kind of silence that weighs on the chest, suffocating and heavy. I didn't know where I was, but I knew I wasn't supposed to be here. And then I heard them, whispers. Soft at first, slithering through the air like invisible fingers curling around my ears. The voices were neither loud nor aggressive, but their words sent an unnatural chill down my spine. Let her die. Let her die so she can guard the house. A slow, breathy chuckle followed. It wasn't the same laughter I had heard in the hallway of my home. This one was different, low and knowing, as if the speaker found amusement in something I had yet to understand. I turned my head, trying to locate the source of the voice, but the hallway remained empty. The only thing ahead was a single door, standing slightly ajar at the end of the passage. It creaked open inch by inch. And then something came rushing out. It moved too fast for me to react, a blur of dark flesh and pale limbs streaking across the hallway. The sound of bare feet slapping against the cold floor echoed loudly. Before I could step back, the figure collided with me, wrapping its small arms around my leg. I looked down. A boy. He was no older than a toddler, wearing nothing but a dirty, tattered diaper. His body was thin, almost unnaturally so, his ribs faintly visible beneath his sickly skin. But it was his face that truly unsettled me. His skin was ghostly white, as if the blood had long since drained from his body. His wide, sunken eyes were voids of inky blackness, and his lips trembled as he clung to me, shivering. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he spoke. "Please, don't let me die, Uncle." A lump formed in my throat. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened, his bony fingers digging into my skin. "Please, help me." His voice wavered, thick with fear and desperation. Then, behind him, the whisper started again. "Let her die. Let her take his place. Let her guard the house." I wanted to run. I wanted to wake up. But my feet felt glued to the floor. The shadows flickered wildly around us, and the candle flames trembled as if something unseen had disturbed them. Then, all at once, the boy's body jerked. His small frame went stiff, his grip loosening. His inky eyes rolled back, and his mouth stretched open in a silent scream. Something was pulling him away. I reached for him on instinct, but the moment my fingers brushed his icy skin, I woke up. My breath came in ragged gasps, my heart slamming against my ribs. I was back in my room, drenched in sweat, my hands shaking violently. For a long moment I just sat there, trying to convince myself it had only been a dream. But the air in my room felt different, cold, like something had followed me back. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I didn't tell my parents or my sisters about the dream. I didn't even tell myself what I already knew deep down. That had not been just a dream. I had been somewhere else, somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. And the boy, who was he? And what did the whispers mean? Let her die so she can guard the house. Who was she? I had a sickening feeling that I already knew the answer. The laughter in the hallway, the woman's voice calling my name, the unseen presence that had been lingering ever since we moved in. She had been there all along, and now she wanted something from me, or worse, someone else. For weeks, the dreams had plagued me, haunting visions, shadowy figures, whispers that clung to my skin long after I woke. At first, I had tried to talk about them, but the more I spoke, the less people believed me. So I stopped. I told myself they were just nightmares, figments of an overactive mind, nothing more than echoes of fear lurking in my subconscious. But deep down, I knew better. And then, one day, the dreams became real. My sister Paula came home in tears. Her face was blotchy and red, her hands shaking as she clutched her arms, trying to hold herself together. She didn't have to say much. We already knew. Her husband had hurt her again. Paula had married young, against my parents' wishes. Her husband, once a gang member, had promised to leave his old life behind. But violence doesn't just disappear, it lingers, festers, poisons. The same rage he once used against his enemies had now turned toward the woman he had vowed to love. My mother, though heartbroken, said nothing. She simply told Paula to stay with us for a few days, hoping that time and distance would give her clarity. But none of us knew how little time we had. The next afternoon, while my mother was out, I was in my room, half-heartedly flipping through a book when I saw Paula walk past my door. Something about her movement struck me as odd, too stiff, too quiet. Then, a few minutes later, she walked past again. This time she was holding something in her hands, a long, white rope. It was the same type of rope my father had recently bought for the garden. My stomach twisted. A sickening feeling crept up my spine, pressing against my ribs like unseen fingers. And then the memory hit me, the dream, the whispering voices. Let her die so she can guard the house. The woman's laughter in the hallway, the toddler's desperate plea, please don't let me die. My pulse pounded in my ears. My body moved before my mind could process what I was doing. I ran to Paula's room and found the door locked. I banged on it. Paula! No answer. I pounded harder. Paula, open the door! Still nothing. Then, through the silence, I heard a soft creak, the sound of wood straining under weight. I stepped back and kicked the door open. The scene before me sent ice through my veins. Paula had tied the rope to the top of the bunk bed. The noose was already around her neck. Her face was pale, streaked with silent tears. She didn't even look at me. She just stood there, frozen, as if trapped between two choices, one foot still touching the ground, the other hovering over the abyss. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward and grabbed her, yanking her down with all my strength. The force of it sent us both crashing onto the floor, but I didn't let go. I held onto her, my arms wrapped tightly around her, feeling her trembling body against mine. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if words would even be enough. So I just sobbed. And slowly, Paula sobbed with me. The rope lay discarded beside us. That night, no one spoke of what had happened. My mother cried silently in the kitchen, the weight of it all too much to bear. My father sat outside, staring into the dark, saying nothing. Paula stayed in her room. For the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming. And then, a few days later, her husband arrived. But he didn't come alone. His family came with him, elders, uncles, aunts. It was a rare sight, a sign of deep shame and repentance in our culture. They bowed their heads, speaking words of regret, of promises to change. They wanted to make amends. They wanted to fix their marriage. But some things, once broken, can never truly be repaired. Paula didn't say much. She simply listened. And in the end, she made her own choice. She didn't return to him. She chose herself. I often wonder about that dream. The voices had whispered about a woman dying to guard the house. Had they meant Paula? Had something in that house wanted to claim her? And what about the boy, the shadowy child who had clung to me, begging me to save him? Was he a warning, a soul trapped in that place, or something else entirely? I don't have the answers, but I do know this. Some warnings come in whispers, Some come in dreams, and some come just in time to save a life. For a long time, I struggled to make sense of everything that had happened. The warnings, the whispers, the dreams, the shadowy child pleading for help, the woman's laughter in the hallway, and most of all, the moment I found Paula standing on the edge of death, seconds away from slipping into the void. Was it all just coincidence? A terrible alignment of events that led me to her room at the right moment? Or was it something more? I didn't have the answer. Not yet. But soon I would. A few days after Paula decided to leave her husband, he asked to speak with me privately. I hesitated at first. I had never trusted him, never understood why Paula had chosen him in the first place. But something in his voice that day was different. He wasn't the angry, violent man I had come to resent. He was just broken. We sat in the backyard, the air thick with unspoken words. He looked exhausted, as if he had barely slept since that night. After a long silence, I finally spoke. I had a dream, I told him. His eyes flickered with confusion. I hesitated for a moment before continuing, unsure of how much I should say. In my dream, I saw Paula. She was holding a white rope, the same kind of rope my father bought, and I swallowed hard. She was going to hang herself. His face went pale. He stared at me for a long moment before his breath hitched, and to my shock, tears welled in his eyes. Then, without warning, he broke down. I watched, stunned, as my brother-in-law, this man who had built his entire identity on being strong, feared, untouchable, covered his face with his hands and wept. That night, he choked out between gasping breaths. The night I hit her, I wasn't even supposed to be home. I frowned. What do you mean? He wiped his face and exhaled shakily. I was supposed to stay in. I told my friends I wasn't going out, but something, I don't know how to explain it. Something pushed me to leave, like a feeling, a strange, overwhelming feeling that I had to go. His voice trembled. I left, and when I came back, we fought, and then I heard her. He shook his head, his fingers gripping his knees, as though he was holding on to something invisible. I keep thinking, what if I had just ignored that feeling? What if I had stayed home? Would things have been different? A slow, cold realization crept up my spine. That feeling that pushed him out of the house. It wasn't random. It was intentional. Something had wanted him to leave, to create chaos, to push Paula to the breaking point, and that something had failed because I had seen it in my dream. The realization made my skin crawl. I never told him what I truly believed, that it hadn't just been a dream, that it had been a warning. At the time, I didn't fully understand it myself. I only knew that the dreams, the whispers, the visions, the laughter in the hallway were all connected. It wasn't until years later, when I embraced my path as a shaman, that I finally understood. There are forces beyond what we can see. Some seek to protect us, others do not. My guardians, my spirit guides, had tried to warn me. They had shown me what was to come, nudging me toward action before it was too late. But something else had been at work that night too. Something had wanted destruction, had wanted Paula to fall, had wanted to claim her. The realization made my blood turn to ice. Was it the same presence that had whispered in the hallway? That had laid the toilet paper trail? That had knocked on my window in the form of Chen's ghost? Or was it something even older? Something that had been waiting long before we ever set foot in that house? Looking back, I can see it all so clearly now. The dead do not always move on peacefully. Some remain trapped in echoes of their past, tethered to the places where they once lived and died. And then there are those that are not the dead. Things that never lived. Things that only feed. If I had ignored my dream, if I had dismissed it as just another nightmare, Paula would be dead. The house would have claimed her. And something tells me that if it had, it wouldn't have stopped there. Because houses like that, haunted houses, never stop at just one soul. They always want more. And that night I learned the most important lesson of all. Some dreams are not just dreams. Some are warnings. And sometimes they come just in time to save a life.